Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Duesterberg, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, and welcome to this video conference sponsored by the Hudson Institute and by the Manufacturing Policy Initiative of the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. We are going to talk about the impact of the pandemic on changes in manufacturing and technology supply chains. In recent years, businesses and public policy leaders have been questioning the resilience of the U.S. supply chains due to the changing economics of production, challenges from global competitors, and new concerns about national security, and by disruptions due to political tensions and natural disasters. The COVID-19 crisis and the ongoing trade tensions with China only reinforce these concerns, especially in high technology and medical products sectors of late. Joining me is an extremely distinguished panel of experts on this topic. We're glad to have someone from education, from academia, and a practitioner actually, and a supply chain leader from the industrial sector. I'm going to start by introducing Sue Smith, who is Vice President for the Technology and Applied Sciences Division and Corporate Executive for Advanced Manufacturing at Ivy Tech Community Colleges in the great state of Indiana. Sue has been with Ivy Tech for over 25 years in various roles, including corporate college, workforce development, and now in the academic division. Ivy Tech is Indiana's community college system, encompassing more than 40 different locations. It's the state's largest public post-secondary institution and the nation's largest single accredited statewide community college system, serving nearly 200,000 students annually. Currently, as Vice President, Sue is responsible for and oversight of all Ivy Tech's technology and applied science degree programs. She aligns the division with industry by engaging corporate partners and stakeholders. And I might add, Sue is a longtime member of the advisory board of the Manufacturing Public Policy Initiative. Next, pleased to introduce Sridhar Kota, who's the Herrick Professor of Engineering, Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Michigan, and the founding executive director of MF Foresight, the Alliance for Global Manufacturing Foresight, a national consortium on emerging technologies and advanced manufacturing. Professor Kota served as the assistant director for advanced manufacturing at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 2009 through 2012. He played an instrumental role in initiating and launching the National Manufacturing Innovation Institutes and the National Robotics Initiative. He is also the founder of and the chief technical officer of Flexus Inc., which developed and flight tested the world's first modern aircraft with shape-changing wings to improve fuel efficiency and noise reduction. And I wish we had time to explore that a little bit, but we're going to focus on supply chains. Finally, Peter Anderson is the Vice President of Global Supply Chains for Cummins Incorporated. In this role, he leads the supply chain organization, which includes over 5,000 employees across purchasing, quality, manufacturing, analytics, central supply chain operations, and remanaging and business process transformation teams. Cummins is one of the world's premier manufacturing companies specializing in diesel, natural gas, and electric-powered engines and electric power generation systems. Prior to joining Cummins, Peter was a partner in Ernst & Young, where he founded its global supply chain practice. While at Ernst & Young, he consulted with Cummins and other global companies to develop supply chain strategies. Peter was also a consultant at IBM Consulting, and while at IBM Consulting, he led the supply chain transformation practice while holding a number of operational interim leadership roles in the industry and providing support. So we're going to ask each of our panelists, going in the reverse order of my introductions, to give a few minutes of opening remarks, and then we'll go into a question and answer period. So Peter, I'll turn things over to you.
Tom, thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody who's joining us on this call. I'd like to give just a little bit of a history piece around this in terms of why through the 80s, the 90s, and then probably up until the mid 2005 time, we really had globalization as an area that we were all striving towards. And for many of us, we were chasing the cost down. And it really was a labor arbitrage play during that period of time. For any of us that were connected to supply chain during that time, we had a number of one-off events. I mean, people call them black swan events, but you could argue that they were forecastable, which throws that into question. We had the tsunami in Asia. We had the ash cloud from Iceland in Europe. We had many significant weather events, and I mean, I think you could argue at the moment that weather events are getting more significant all over the globe at this point. So we've seen a rise of events through that period of time. We then get to 2018, 2017, and we started to see the rise of tariffs. The challenge was with China and the 301, and then we had 232 tariffs. So all of those things started to get us thinking about what can we do differently. We then had the challenge in 2017 of NAFTA being re-looked at, and obviously just subsequently the re-agreement on USMCA. We had a number of fairly significant strikes in places around the world. So that was causing us to think about how we were going to structure our supply chains. And then come 2019 and COVID-19 and the start in China of the pandemic, which has subsequently touched just about everywhere on the world. All of those events have led us to thinking about global supply chains leave a huge amount of risk for an organization. And I think from probably the mid-2010 onwards, companies have really been looking at regionalization and moving more towards regional supply chain type of structures to mitigate risk. What the pandemic has done is actually drive us more towards even thinking about it down at a local level. What do we need to do locally to do that? What's been really interesting in all of this is that many of the factors that drove us to that globalization, we can now think differently about. Labor arbitrage being one of those specifically. I mean, in Cummins, one of our most advanced Industry 4.0 locations, a lighthouse manufacturing facility as designated by the World Economic Forum, is actually located in China, and it's showing the way that we can actually bring more technology back to the US through using cobots and some of the Industry 4.0, because we're negating the need to meet those labor arbitrage costs now. So in the future, some of the technologies that are being designated today will actually drive us much more towards localization and regionalization. Tom, I'll give that back to you.
Okay, thanks very much. It's great to have a perspective of one of the America's leading industrial companies. Now we'll turn to Sridhar.
Thanks, Tom. Let me begin by first acknowledging my co-author, Tom Mahoney, Associate Director of M4Site, for all his work in preparing our paper. So this pandemic has revealed the weakness, dependency, and lack of resiliency in US industrial base. The pandemic is new, but the weakness is not. Several reports in the past 3 decades highlighted the weakness, but the policymakers ignored them, believing that the free market will take care. It hasn't. Your topic, that how will the COVID-19 change manufacturing and technology supply chains? My response is nothing will change because of COVID-19, unless the federal government develops and implements a national strategy and makes long-term investments. It's not about reshoring lost industries. It's about rebuilding our lost capabilities. Decades of offshore manufacturing have eroded our industrial commons. That is, diminished our capacity to innovate, by eroding engineering skills, manufacturing know-how, and supply chains. These skills and know-how are what we used to call American ingenuity. In too many industries, we have lost those capabilities. So innovation is about making new products and new processes at scale by leveraging our discoveries and inventions. By that definition, we have not done much innovation in hardware technologies in the past 3 decades. Because the tight linkages between actual production and new product innovations have been lost, the long-held strategy to invent here, manufacture there is fast becoming innovate there, manufacture there. The United States may still be one of the most inventive countries, but no longer the most innovative, at least in hardware. Think of innovation cycle as a baseball diamond. Our investment in basic research gets us to the first base with promising discoveries and inventions. A small fraction of those inventions transition to the second base to create working prototypes. A subset of those move to pilot production, the third base, and full volume production back at the home base. We haven't completed the cycle when it comes to hardware in decades. But again, thanks to federal funding, we're still best in the world when it comes to scientific discoveries and inventions. We created millions of jobs in other countries, manufacturing products that were largely invented in the United States, such as flat panel displays, smartphones, solar cells, lithium-ion batteries, and drones. We are creating knowledge, but not national wealth, not national security, and certainly not health security. We are willingly and routinely giving away our IP to other countries in emerging technologies now because we no longer have the engineering skills or the manufacturing know-how to scale. None of the 150 hardware startups from MIT last decade scaled in this country due to lack of manufacturing know-how, infrastructure, and suppliers. Of those that scaled, 70% scaled in China. See, most product and process innovations happen when we get to the third base, and the wealth creation happens when we get to the home base. But we don't get past the second base. No wonder we have difficulty winning. So again, it's not the high wages, not taxes, not trade, not regulations. It's not the automation that brought us to this place. Think Germany, Japan, and South Korea for a moment. These advanced nations have strong manufacturing and innovation ecosystems. They have higher wages, they have higher taxes, they have strict regulations, they have higher energy costs, and significantly higher levels of automation compared to the US. They have all weathered China's competition far better than us. So what is their secret? Their companies have longer term priorities, and they value all stakeholders, not just shareholders like American multinationals do. And their government invests 4 to 8 times more than the United States in translational R&D, in engineering and manufacturing R&D. We have 58 manufacturing programs across 11 federal agencies. All of them are relatively small and uncoordinated. And they have not achieved the nationwide systemic strategic approach needed to restore American manufacturing competitiveness. And arguably, they actually hurt progress by giving the impression that the problems are already being addressed. Currently, there's no federal agency that has the health of the nation's manufacturing at its primary mission. If not China 2025, this pandemic should wake us up to create a new agency in the federal government with the sole focus to rebuild our lost capabilities and ensure that we lead the world again in key industries that are critical to national security, national wealth, and health security. But federal government intervention to build industrial base, that's a preposterous idea. That's industrial policy. That's unthinkable. I don't think so. Of all the manufacturing sectors, the only sector where the US shows trade surplus is in aerospace. Think about it, government has always played a major role in this sector. We may not like to admit it, but we've always had an industrial policy in aerospace. Government invests in basic research, in translational research, in development, in demonstration, in deployment, and in procurement, making sure our companies complete the innovation cycle and win. And they do, no matter who is in the White House. Every president helps this industry, even in marketing and sales, when they visit other countries. That is an industrial policy that's working, and we must apply such policy to other sectors like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, battery storage, electric vehicles, Industry 4.0, and in foundational capabilities like machine tools. So we outlined in our paper a 6-point plan what this new agency should focus on. But let me just say one thing. None of that will work unless we have legislation that says if the intellectual property for a product or a process is developed based on federal funded R&D, taxpayer dollars, then that product or process must be manufactured substantially in the United States, at least 75% value added in the United States without any exceptions or waivers. Without such legislation, we will continue to watch other countries pick our winners, as they have been doing it for a while. And finally, I just want to leave with 3 points. If this pandemic was a war, we would not be having this luxury to have this meeting. It would be too late. If we, number one, if we have the collective will to shift the paradigm of shareholder primacy, we could win the next war. Number two, Congress need to stop spending. They need to start investing. If you invest, you tend to focus on a return on investment. Doing more of the same somehow is not going to give us a different result. And finally, I want to say this confusion between science and engineering, that's uniquely American. Surely we must continue to invest and double down on our investments in science. But if we ever care to get past the first base, we need to invest in engineering to rebuild that American ingenuity. And finally, Churchill probably really did not say it, but I'm reminded of the quote. We can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they tried everything else. I think now is the time to do the right thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sridhar. I should have mentioned that the paper you referred to a couple of times in your remarks was a paper commissioned by the Manufacturing Policy Initiative. And my understanding is that very soon that paper will be made available on the website of the Manufacturing Policy Initiative. So thank you for that. Now over to you, Sue.
Well, thank you, Tom. I come at this from a little different perspective. I feel like that community colleges are on the front lines, if you will, of the workforce challenges to support manufacturing. And I think that during this really difficult and challenging time for our nation and the world, it has become even more apparent that manufacturing for any country is critical. I mean, our national security, our safety, quality of life, it depends on how quickly we can develop and design and build what we need, basically, as you all have pointed out. It also depends on how rapidly we can innovate and research and manufacture a life-saving device or protective equipment or a test or a cure or a vaccine. And a sector this important, I think, should be highly supported. It should be revered. It should be valued. There should be investment in a sector like this, right, for any country. But resources just really haven't been readily available for the most talented, to form the most talented workforce and to recruit the most talented workforce. I mean, schools, we should have the most cutting edge equipment and faculty. We should have funding that is plentiful to ensure a highly skilled workforce. But the pandemic has really brought to light a heavy dependence on manufacturing to supply our needs, from producing and packaging food to making cleaners and paper towels and toilet paper. And for the United States and for federal, state, and governments, I agree, COVID is a wake-up call. It's a call to arms to support manufacturing and the development of the resources needed by manufacturing and to support a skilled workforce. Then community colleges are really not funded at a level that's needed to support manufacturing programs. Community colleges are in the front line, certainly, to provide a skilled workforce, but we constantly struggle to secure funding for equipment. We've got faculty who are not like university faculty. They're not paid at that level. They're not paid in wages in line to make them easy to recruit or retain. So there needs to be some funding for state and national governments to support that. But, you know, the biggest challenge for us is quite honestly on the front lines is to recruit talent to the manufacturing sector. You know, manufacturing as we know it is highly revered and valued, but across the country, it's not really that well known, and it doesn't really have the reputation it needs for us to be able to recruit talent to the manufacturing sector. So I think that there needs to be some sort of, you know, in regardless of what a new organization or a new arm of the government does to support this, or a new committee or whatever you want to call it, we have to have national ad campaigns that recruit talent to the sector. We've got to change that perception of the manufacturing industry. So, and I see it as a very creative sector, and that creativity has really ushered in this fourth industrial revolution. So as companies adopt higher levels of technology and increase automation and artificial intelligence and virtual reality and big data, you know, they should be recognized for that. They should be incentivized for that, you know, to support engineering, to support those kinds of solutions that we know come with American ingenuity. So higher technology really fosters an increased efficiency and productivity, which leads to some cost savings, which could make companies globally competitive to some extent. But manufacturing is really bipartisan and affects every American, as we experienced in many parts of the country over the last few months when, you know, toilet paper became currency in some cities. I'm sure you all saw that on different social media channels, that people were trading toilet paper for things. You know, so we really can't, I guess, not recognize the importance of manufacturing. And so as a nation, we have to support and incentivize the growth of this critical industry and address the needed resources to foster that economic development and secure our standard of living as one of the richest nations on the planet.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Would any of you like to respond to the others' opening remarks? Okay, well, let me start. Both Frida and Sue lamented the lack of talent from the United States going into engineering fields and into the skills, specialized skills training that places like Ivy Tech provides. And I would note that having some experience with Ivy Tech, since one of my brothers taught at one of your locations for many years, and he taught laser technology. This is not manual labor. This is not just running machines. This is some of the stuff that you guys do is highly skilled labor, which takes a fair technical background. So let me ask both Frida and Sue, do we need a culture, some sort of a cultural shift to attract more students into these technical fields? Sridhar, you mentioned specifically engineering, but I think we perhaps have a shortage of advanced students in the physical science. And Sue, from your perspective, are you seeing a pickup of interest in manufacturing technology related skills at your institution? Sridhar, why don't you go? Well, Sue, go ahead.
Sure. We are not seeing an increase in manufacturing as a career. We go to the technician level. We have engineering techs as well, and we go to the technician level, and we are not seeing that increase. We're seeing an increase in need from manufacturing companies, but we're just not seeing students being attracted to that field as a career. And I think that the stigma and the perception is still there that, you know, it's not stable. It's certainly not an attractive career. It's dirty. It's whatever. You know, I think that still resonates with some folks across the country, and it is difficult for us to recruit students into that area.
I have a different take on it. What Sue said is it is true to some extent, but I recall this survey that Proto Labs did, I believe in 2018, I don't know the exact numbers. It's something along the lines that if manufacturing is an advanced career they asked this question, I believe 22% of baby boomers only said it is, as opposed to more like 36 to 40% of millennials thought that is in fact an advanced manufacturing is a good career option, which is very encouraging on one hand. On the other hand, the stigma, the couple of things I want to say. The large or OEMs, number one, they've forgotten what they used to do with internships and apprenticeship programs in the past, and they need to get back and roll up their sleeves and do that. Now, companies like Toyota and Siemens in this country, they are doing that on their own. So more of our companies need to be doing that. I'm not, some companies are doing, not all. All of them should. When it comes to small and medium-sized scale operations, they have difficulty with finding the skilled workers. This is where government can step in and help them in a number of ways, including promoting Ivy Tech kind of programs. There's an Oregon Tech. I remember the kids graduating from there are just highly sought after because they come with not just education, but also training. Think about the medical school education. They train, they not only do the fundamental education in medicine, but they also get training working with doctors and patients. Why can't, that's a pretty successful model. Why can't we do that? They're called polytechnics, right? That's what Germany does. There's no reason why we can't have more Ivy Techs and Oregon Techs in every state, multiples of them. And so I think we really need to step up and not, there are so many reports written on it already. It's about time we put something in action, and the federal government has a very important role to play in doing that.
Tom, can I just answer for a second on that one? And this is a bit of a challenge to all of us that actually have manufacturing operations as well, and we've got to hold a bit of a mirror up to ourselves here. And that, I liaise with many universities and with technical colleges, and many of the students coming out to those have actually come into the manufacturing community, and what we don't have necessarily is machinery, equipment. We haven't put the right into it, and I'm talking generally here, that actually excites and wants people to come into the industry as well, because what they learn in college, they suddenly come into the industry and say, oh, you're behind, we haven't invested in it. So manufacturing as a career, it's not necessarily somewhere they stay, because what they've been taught is completely different from reality as well.
Sure.
Let me ask all three of you. One of the issues in manufacturing in a lot of technical fields, at both the higher skill levels and at the production worker, if you will, the skilled jobs, is the lack of women going into those fields. You can see that in the numbers in engineering, but is there anything we should be doing to try to attract more women who, after all, are the majority of college students these days? Is there anything we should be doing to attract more women into these fields?
I can, engineering across the board, it's about 22% or so, or 25% women graduates. But if you look at biomedical engineering and environmental engineering, it's more like 50%. I remember the comment by the president of Olin College saying that women are overrepresented, way overrepresented, when he was referring to the some fellowship and entrepreneurship programs at Olin College, and also that 50% of the graduation classes are women. So the difference is the engineering is portrayed as a creative activity. And this is when according to their study, when women see an activity where they could actually add value to society, they go into those fields like biomedical and environmental engineering. So we need to make engineering more than what it is in terms what it actually say what it is, that is being a creative activity. Same thing with manufacturing. If you expose them to the incredible manufacturing machines, what happens on the manufacturing floor at Cummins, I think kids get really excited about it. We are not inspiring them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, you know, it's basic marketing, right? If you don't see yourself in that career, if you don't you know, understand that you could be a part of that career, then it's very difficult to recruit someone into that career. And so I think the more that we can market to women, other women working in those careers, like engineering and bio and medical engineering, I think that that's a really good approach. But I also want to go back to what Peter was saying, and that is, unless my lab looks like his lab, and it doesn't, then it's going to be very difficult to attract students. I mean, I just toured the Cummins Center in Columbus, where they're working on you know, the Industry 4.0 and setting up a lab that is truly completely Industry 4.0 with virtual reality, and it's amazing. It's you know, you want to do that. That's what you want to do when you see it, you know, and it's just so cool. And if I could show that kind of a lab to students, I think it would be much easier to get them involved.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
And there is
Well,
no
I-
reason we can't do that. The government, why we can't make the necessary investment? So Sue's lab looks like Cummins' lab. Why we should be doing that?
Yes.
And I recall, Sue, when my brother taught at Vincennes University in the laser lab, I believe that Cummins was a big supplier of some of the equipment that was used in that lab. But let me turn to the economics of some of these questions. And Peter, let me address this one to you. You mentioned increasing regionalization and even localization of production. And let's face it, the big gorilla in the room is China and our experience with China. But is it realistic to think that companies like Cummins, and you're one of many, with a major presence in China, could move production back or move it to a third country without significant disruptions in terms of time, availability of supply, and economic efficiencies? That's sort of a general question, but I'd like to see how you are thinking about those sorts of questions.
No, it's a great question, Tom, and it's very much in two parts as well, because we talk about moving manufacturing back. Many of the engines that I make today in China are actually for the China or the Asia market. Whereas very little actually comes from in a completed engine form back to markets in the West. The challenge that we actually have is more around components, in that there's a lot of components that are made in China that are difficult to localize back to the US. And we talk in terms of lost skills, lost capability. I mean, a great example is foundries, for instance. We don't have foundries in the US anymore, so we don't do casting. We don't have critical mass and scale around those activities. I think longer term, we are going to have to look at different ways of solving those problems, whether that's through more Industry 4.0, through additive manufacturing, using other different types of technology. But what's helped us is actually having to mitigate some of the challenges that we had with the tariffs. Actually, that's to the point where we started all of this about not having a mandate, not having something that's a pressing concern. Many of the organizations I work with, we've actually started to take things out of China to mitigate some of those tariff issues already. So it's shown us the way to how we can bring things to other locales and actually still make them cost effective, where I don't think we had an incentive to do that 3-4 years ago.
Okay,
Any other comments on that general question?
I think with entrenched supply chains, it's just too easy, too compelling to continue to manufacture in China. And it's not going to be that easy. It took us several decades to get to this point. We slowly but surely eroded away our industrial commons. It's not going to come back in 2021. if we make long-term commitment and invest in the right places, empower small and medium-sized companies to make those components, to create that foundry here, then it will take probably a decade before we have a chance to establish, let alone lead, the industries of the future. Otherwise nothing will change.
Okay,
I think there's a really important point to add to that as well, in that it would take a long time for things to come back. But what we can do now is stop more migrating. With Industry 4.0 and the PrepBots and other technologies, it's actually giving us the better decision to manufacture those things closer to where the requirements are, rather than taking it offshore on a pure labor arbitrage play.
The only thing I would add to that is just that we have to remember that without the workforce, we can't bring it back anyway. So we were already in dire need of workforce, and you know, when our unemployment rate was 2 and 3%, and the skills gap didn't close just because we had a recession. So we still need to think about how we're going to get that workforce to bring those back.
Well, I want to return to that in a while, but I had a related economics questions from one of the board members of the board of advisors of the Manufacturing Policy Initiative. His question is, in automotive, where I have deep roots, if we had to make every part in North America, the cost of the completed vehicle would increase by 20 to 40%. This would make domestic OEMs uncompetitive without imports. So to protect domestic industry, there would have to be tariffs in that range and a substantial increase in vehicle prices. That would in turn affect sales and the economy. Similarly, in healthcare, if we were to make masks, gloves, ventilators, protective equipment, costs would go up. So we have a trade-off between economic efficiency, according to this board member, and the desire to bring as much production as possible as we can back home. So how would our panelists balance the consequences of adverse costs and perhaps less efficient supply chain versus the confidence gained by making everything in North America? So there are a lot of assumptions built into that question, but I would invite any of you to comment on especially the trade-offs that we're going to have to think about making. Sridhar?
So I'm not sure I buy that 20 to 40% quoted in that question. I think in automotive, to the best of my recollection, maybe Peter can correct me, it's probably 10%. In highly capital-intensive industry like automotive, the actual labor cost is 10%, approximately 10%. So if you look at cars.com website, it shows you the 10 most American cars, or 15 most American cars, meaning the ones that had the most impact on the economy. I think a majority of those are Hondas and Toyotas. They are not only investing, Japanese and German companies investing in this country, not only surviving, they are thriving. They are not only making excellent products in Kentucky, in Mississippi, and everywhere else, as you all know, they are exporting these cars to other countries. So somehow they're making it, and we are very competitive. When you make the long-term investments like these German and Japanese companies do, not only in Germany and Japan, but they're doing it here in this country. I think we can do it. We are already doing it.
Peter, would you have any comments on that question? You're in a related industry, at least.
No, I actually agree with all of the comments that were made there. I think because of technology and because those lines that they operate these days are much less labor intensive than they were, they are getting any of the parts for that from either North American, US, or Mexican producers. But we actually have compared to certain parts of the world, a very competitive automotive industry. I mean, it's obviously different if you try and compare it to Chinese vehicles or Indian vehicles, but if you compare it to the likes of a BMW or a Mercedes or something else, we have a competitive model, as they're proving by having the plants here and being profitable.
But one thing I must add, going back to earlier comment Peter made about making those components, right? The supply chains, right? So even if you go back to Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing, Cummins has probably what it takes to do smart manufacturing, or Toyota does, or General Motors does. But unless you bring that technology down to the tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s, you're really not going to have a real impact, which means the small and medium-sized companies who are always struggling to make the immediate supplying the products to their customers, they don't have the luxury, they don't have the capital to invest in upgrading their equipment to 4.0. This is exactly where the government has a role to play to empower the small companies. They never had China plan, they never will have China plan. And we've decimated the Midwest and rest of the country by ignoring this for decades. So we need to really empower them. That's how you build the industrial commons. If we do that, more and more of these companies will come here, because even with tariffs, they're not coming back, they're going to Vietnam.
Okay, since we flagged this discussion as being somewhat related to the pandemic and how it's accelerated some of the long-term trends, Sridhar, you've worked on through your consulting business, I believe, and your research on the pharmaceutical industry, and that's come into sharp relief, if you will, because of the pandemic. So I think many of us were very surprised to learn that a very significant portion, both of the raw materials and the manufactured products, were made China, to a certain extent in India as well, and elsewhere. And I guess this question is we'll start with you, Sridhar, if we could. Is it realistic to think that we can bring back pharmaceutical production with some reference to the materials, the raw materials that we need, but also people tend to underestimate the difficulties of actually producing some of the chemical compounds, let alone some of the biological drugs. And Sue, for you, do you train people to work in medical research sectors? And do you have any comments from your sector, as your perspective as well? So Sridhar, could we start with you on that?
Yeah, this is not a consulting, it's about the M4 the national think tank that I do, get a chance to interact with a number of industry sectors. So let me share with you what little I know about it. Yes, the 70% of active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, they come from overseas, and over 30% sourced from India and China. So yes, I think you're right on with your questions, but can we bring it back? If you look up something called continuous manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, I'll just give that as an example. This is a different way of producing pharmaceuticals as opposed to batch production. And the continuous manufacturing allows us to do these things at, especially for tablets and other solid ingredients, at a scale where you have a low cost and high quality alternative to produce, cost-effective way to produce them here in the US. And this is work that the government has funded for more than a decade now. That's been done at Rutgers and other places, and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and FDA all embrace the technology. We need to go back, not just invest in research, but try to reap the benefits of that outcomes. We need to invest in technologies like that to bring back pharmaceutical manufacturing to the US. And the other part is that we are investing, the pharmaceutical industry, again, benefits significantly from the massive investments by the government through NIH on the basic research. Pharmaceutical industry spends about $1 more on advertising than on R&D. And so there are some things we need to fundamentally fix. And yes, it can be done. But again, this is the kind of thing we need to sit down and figure out what's our strategy, what sectors are important to us for national security, for health security. And then we should really double down and create the infrastructure, make the investments to create the industrial commons like we did for aerospace industry. And pharmaceuticals definitely is one of them. We don't need to bring back everything. There are some key things we can do to keep the supply chains here.
Well, Sue, the educational infrastructure is important if in not only in medical products, but in other fields, as we've already discussed. Do you see any interest does Ivy Tech offer skilled jobs in that in the medical products sector? Indiana, after all, is a big manufacturer of especially medical devices, but also pharmaceuticals like Bristol Myers and Eli Lilly. Do you train people to work in those industries, and is there enhanced interest at this point?
Yeah, we do. We have for the sort of chemical tech jobs, we have a degree in biotech, but we train mostly in the advanced manufacturing area, which is medical manufacturing, because manufacturing is really manufacturing, whether you're making, whatever the product is. And so, as we work with Zimmer and Lilly and some of those folks, it's more about our mechatronics degrees and our advanced automation robotics technology degree, because their systems are very automated already. And it's a field that we already pretty much train a lot of the workforce that goes into their manufacturing companies.
Okay, Peter, I wanted to ask you to look beyond Cummins a little bit. You've been in the business, in high-tech industrial world for a long time, including in China. Are you seeing, in addition to what you at Cummins are doing, other companies that are thinking the same way? There was a recent survey from the U.S.-China Business Council indicating that at least a growing percentage of American companies operating in China are at least thinking about diversifying their supply chain, if not moving as much as they can back to North America. Do you see that from your perspective?
That's a great question, Tom. I mean, we've been looking for a number of years at taking things and looking at where we need to have that critical manufacturing at. So even before my time at Cummins, and I've been there just a little over 3 years now, we were looking at regionalization for many companies, and many companies have moved things from China to other locations. For many different reasons, and I think it varies across different industries as to how quickly those things are evolving. But overall, many companies have moved more things to India. We've moved, and in fact, we've actually seen Chinese companies moving to Mexico so that they can be closer to supply in North America, setting up a footprint in Mexico. And funny enough, actually in the US as well. I mean, I have a number of suppliers in Cummins that we didn't want to have supply from India or China because of the long lead times, and those companies actually have put manufacturing operations onto the US soil now. So I think we are seeing it starting to come back. However, as I said previously, there are certain things that we just don't have the skills, the capability, the raw materials to actually do and make in the US at this point in time. And that's the more difficult challenges that we have to figure out whether that makes sense to bring back to the US at this point.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd like to, we're drawing to the end of our discussion, but Sridhar, you've done a lot of work in the last 10 years about innovation. and you have written extensively about the interaction of manufacturing and innovation. And many American companies, companies like Apple or Qualcomm, for instance, do most of their research. Intel possibly fits into that category as well, but do a lot of their research in the United States, then manufacture abroad. And your argument is that real innovation is inextricably linked to the production function. So could you explain your idea on that? And perhaps Peter or Sue would want to comment.
So I think Apple is a whole different conversation by itself. But more and more companies are actually moving even their R&D to China in the last decade. It's not only offshoring manufacturing, we are offshoring innovation. 40%, close to 50% of all foreign R&D centers in China in the last decade are by American multinationals, because innovation happens faster there. Because of, we asked them, there are 367 companies that went there. There was a survey, and the majority, why are you establishing R&D and innovation there in China? Because of access to, certainly access to market. So we had a market here too, but access to market, access to manufacturers and suppliers, and access to talent in China. So that is, if we don't, only when you do the scale manufacturing, going beyond prototypes, that's when the real product innovations and process innovations come about. That's where the real innovation comes. And if you don't do that, we're just coming up with great discoveries and inventions and handing it over to our friends overseas. So that is why it is important. Unless you manufacture, if you don't manufacture today's high-tech product, you lose your ability to innovate. Look what happened to flat panel displays. We did not manufacture them. Now all the infrastructure that went with it and the knowledge that went with it or stayed with in Asia. Now the next generation display technology, like flexible electronics, when it comes to large area flexible displays, that's not happening here. That will not happen here. It's already happening in Asia. You and I will be buying a 100-inch TV that can be folded up in a few years, and that's not going to be made in the US, even though we invested the foundational, the federal government invested in the created underlying knowledge for all of these thin film semiconductors and all the technologies. So that's our collective inability to scale. That is not sustainable. And for the companies, it's always about cost cutting. The first thing to do is to move manufacturing overseas. Now R&D is probably going to be more expensive to do it here than over there. So what are we going to have anything left? Because the only way to create wealth is to manufacture. The service industry is really you're shifting money from one pocket to another. That is why we need to really double down and make the investments we need to create this infrastructure for engineering and manufacturing. That's what we used to be good at during World War II, And we had companies right here turning car companies into making airplanes and bombers, in which we all know. We have difficulty getting masks and ventilators today. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and I recall years ago when I was working for the Manufacturers Alliance for Productivity and Innovation. I had lots of friends in the aerospace industry, and I was always curious about why China was unable to match U.S. innovation in that sector, and China still is behind us. And you mentioned the trade surplus, but a lot of the executives I talked to claim that in addition to just fundamental technology, the systems integration aspect and the actual manufacturing know-how, which people tend to underestimate, is a learned skill, and it's not easy to do. I mean, especially with a complex product like an airplane or a big tractor. Advanced automobiles are not easy to make. So I don't know, Peter, would you have any comments on that theory of the need to keep manufacturing close because of its impact on innovation?
No, absolutely, Tom. I mean, I think some of the things that we're learning as we're progressing into new technologies with additive, actually having the ability to have an engineer, a designer that's close to what we can actually achieve with manufacturing is becoming even more important than it was previously, because putting the knowledge together of what you can do with an additive machine and what you can do from a research and technology perspective and enhancing the products, it really is taking a two-pronged approach of putting that engineer, the manufacturing capability, and the research and technology person together to actually design that product of the future. And I mean, just in our own example, I don't think I've worked as closely with our R&T team as I have over the last 2 years, as we actually moved into additive manufacturing and actually making parts that are better than the originals that were designed.
Okay, we've pretty much come to the end of our the time that we promised all of you. Before we leave, are there any comments that any of you would like to make that didn't come up in the conversation so far? Is there a burning desire to add anything on your parts?
So Tom, I would just add in talking about the access question, access to skilled labor and highly skilled labor and talent in this country. For manufacturing, in my opinion, and I've been at this for about 30 years now and working with manufacturers, we have got to change the way we view, the way we talk about, the way we value manufacturing in this country. We have to change that culture, and we can't get talent to those critical jobs unless those critical jobs are seen as good careers. And so, I think engineering is a challenge. I think, just getting folks attracted into that is really going to be a big challenge. And so I really think the nation needs to take a long, hard look at how we might change that perception.
Okay, that seems to me to be a great note on which to wind up this very enlightening conversation. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope our viewers will learn a lot as well. I want to thank each of you for your very thoughtful contributions. So let's sign off from the Hudson Institute and the Manufacturing Policy Initiative. Thank you.